Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bob Mizon. Welcome to International Dark Sky Week. This is a scheme of the International Dark Sky Association based in Tucson, Arizona. And if you go to their excellent website, darksky.org, you'll see all sorts of advice and good words about light pollution and how to treat it and how to regain the night sky. But the purpose of my talk really is something a little bit more extended. And I'm calling it Save the Stars and so much more. I belong to the Commission for Dark Skies. This is, if you like, the UK equivalent of the IDA. And we were formed shortly after them, 1989. We were formed a group of concerned astronomers in the British Astronomical Association who were getting rather worried at the tide of light pollution that was sweeping over the night sky inexorably, it seemed, all over the UK and, of course, all over the developed world. It started as the Campaign for Dark Skies. It became the Commission for Dark Skies later on. And the reason it says so much more in that title is that if light pollution is minimized, if it's defeated, mitigated, say what you like, then an awful lot of other benefits will occur because of that. It's not just an astronomer's problem. This is one of the main points of this talk. It is not a bunch of whinging astronomers who are losing their hobby. If we can get rid of all that waste light going up into the sky, going through people's windows, glaring in the eyes of drivers, all sorts of other problems, then it will do us, the planet and everything on it, a lot of good. Let's talk about Save the Stars. Now, you can see I'm pretty old because I can remember a singer called Peggy Lee, and she did a rather splendid, I'm not going to sing it, a rather splendid song called Fever. And it says, sun lights up the daytime, moon lights up the night. And this is everybody's perception. A lot of people think that the moon's out every night. Well, it's only about half the time, actually. We definitely know that the sun lights up the daytime, except in the UK quite a lot of the time when it's behind a pall of cloud. But is it really the moon that lights up the night? Stars can light up the night. You'd be surprised under a really starry sky in a dark place how you can actually see quite well by the light of millions of stars above your head. But there's something else, of course, that lights up the night these days, and it's stray light, light pollution, obtrusive light, waste light, call it what you like. In 2009, American environmental journalist Verlin Klinkerberg wrote in the National Geographic, "We've lit up the night as if it were an unoccupied country when nothing could be further from the truth." What is that? It's a scrapyard, I believe, in Norfolk. And the owner of the scrapyard obviously thinks that lighting the scrapyard would be a good idea. After all, we don't want people to come along and steal valuable metals. But of course, if there were no lights at all, we wouldn't know there was a scrapyard there. Unless, of course, we were local and we knew the area quite well. But all this really misses the point in that that light doesn't really light up just the scrapyard, does it? The lights are obviously aimed so that they escape, the emissions escape into the sky, sideways, upwards. The local wildlife probably doesn't like it too much, and if there are any neighbours, they may not be too enamored of this particular effect. An awful lot of creatures of the night, are seriously disorientated, troubled, killed by light pollution. I was listening to a talk a couple of days ago by a professional lighting engineer who made the point that a lot of modern lighting is far too bright, it's badly aimed, and of course, it escapes from towns into the countryside. It escapes from farms into the surrounding countryside, from small villages into the surrounding countryside. In that area at night, there's an awful lot going on. When Verlin Klinkerberg said we've treated the night as if it were an unoccupied country, nothing can be further from the truth. An enormous amount is going on at night time outside our homes, in the countryside, in urban gardens. There's an awful lot going on. Some of us might have noticed robins and blackbirds singing at 3 o'clock in the morning if we're ever sort of suffering from a touch of insomnia. If you think of the number of nocturnal creatures, hedgehogs, for example, even a lot of invertebrates operate at night. And so we are sharing our light with them, and there's very good evidence that they don't like it, and it does them a lot of harm. So this is not just an astronomer's problem, all this sky glow and light escape. It does have other ramifications too. Consider the top picture. It was taken in the New Forest before it was a national park. And there you have a couple of members of the Wessex Astronomical Society who are observing the night sky. Well, actually, they're not, because there's a cottage about 200 meters away there. And the cottage has a security, in inverted commas, a security light. Now, I don't think it's the astronomers who've triggered it, because they're probably too far away. Maybe the local fox or something like this. But you can see the problem. The amount of security this light offers is pretty small, isn't it? Because, of course, you can't really see anything at all. Anything could be going on behind that wall of light, and nobody can actually see it. So not only have they lost their stars, but the owner of the cottage has lost a lot of security by having a light that's pretty inappropriate. The lower picture shows a car storage yard in a large town. There's no evidence from the picture that it's a car storage yard, because you can't see anything at all in the yard. The lights are so badly aimed that they dazzle onlookers, and they provide pretty good cover for any ne'er-do-well who is down there pinching the catalytic converters or whatever else there is to pinch in new cars. The facets of light pollution are many. There's glare, which is, of course, the most safety-related part of light pollution. Sky glow, we've mentioned, the loss of the night sky. There are many people who have never seen the night sky properly. The people in urban areas who perhaps have noticed that the moon and one or two bright planets occasionally, but very little else. Light intrusion into premises is a growing problem. Many people complain to their local councils about neighbours' intrusive exterior lights, and the councils occasionally try to do something about it, but it's a very poorly enforced thing, and we'll mention that particular little branch of the law later on. The environmental degradation is probably the worst thing that's happening. And of course, if we waste energy by allowing all this light to escape, we are hastening climate change. We're wasting the fuels that power the stations that produce the energy, and we're wasting an awful lot of people's money too. So it is not just an astronomer's problem, it's everybody's problem. Recently, the Commission for Dark Skies had some posters made, which we'll use when circumstances allow in our travelling exhibition. These by Cheryl Geary of Cheltenham. And you can see that the message is that nature needs the night. It's quite catchy, isn't it? Nature needs the night. So whether it's a bat, and many species of bats are severely deterred by lighting, others have cottoned onto the fact that if you go towards the light, you might find lots of insects, but of course no good is happening here, because the bats lay themselves open to predation, and the insects shouldn't be flying around lights. They should be getting on with their little insect lives. So whether you're a bat or a dung beetle, yes, there are dung beetles all over the world, in fact, but the particular species we're talking about here is the African dung beetle. And you might have seen these wonderful little documentaries on television recently about how dung beetles manage to roll their little ball of dung in a nice straight line back to their lair. And the answer, of course, is they navigate by the moon quite often. But as I've mentioned, the moon is only in the sky for about half of the time. On many nights of the month, it's just not there at all. And they've learned to navigate by the Milky Way. The brightest part of the Milky Way, which in Africa is almost overhead, is what dung beetles sort of try to aim for. And they push their little ball of dung towards that brighter part of the Milky Way to find their homes. Moths, of course, die in their millions because of the presence of glary lights. And glowworms are disappearing fast, certainly in this country. There are surveys that show this. And the main reason is probably the lack of dark habitats, because the vegetation, the soil type, the tiny snails that they feed on, they're all still there. The only thing that isn't there is the darkness, which gives them the cue to glow to attract a mate. And we've all heard of the sea turtles. I don't think this is a particularly British thing, but in Florida, certainly, lots and lots of hatchlings, turtle hatchlings, who come out during the night and scrabble down the beach towards the phosphorescence of the sea. They now turn inland and scrabble towards the lights of local nightclubs, houses, roads, traffic, and they die under the wheels of trucks and cars. People often go out with buckets and try to save them, but it certainly is not a good thing for turtle populations to have their hatchlings go the wrong way. This is a little bank somewhere in Berkshire, I think. And Robin Scadgel, who's particularly interested in glowworms, he sent me this photo. And you can see that this grassy bank, although the night is falling, you can see a star or two in the sky. This grassy bank is illuminated by a new industrial estate just off the picture here. And people living near this area have reported that just about every single glowworm, and there used to be lots of them, every single glowworm has disappeared because the habitat of darkness, and the night is the Earth's biggest habitat, has disappeared. A reminder that most of the planet's land species are nocturnal, and nearly all of those species are insects, invertebrates. Some of us are familiar with pictures like this, the Earth from space at night. This is a mosaic by NASA of the particular hotspots, if you like, of light pollution. We've got the eastern half of the USA, Europe. Britain is a particular offender, with Belgium and the Netherlands following close behind. We can see all the lights of Japan. I'm particularly intrigued by the lights of the River Nile here. So Egypt on satellite photos like this appears as a little ribbon north to south at the top of Africa. So these things are causing a lot of damage. Light energy waste, the invasion of the night by stray light, and something that we ought to mention next, which is human health issues. This is a pub exterior light here. You can't really see it's a pub because the light is too blinding, but lights like this go into people's houses. There are so many research papers on the internet now about human health and artificial lighting, or ALAN as it's sometimes called, artificial light at night. ALAN, it's given itself a little name. Just look at these websites, just search lighting and human health, and you'll find links to all sorts of disorders, insomnia, disorientation, even breast cancer. The American Medical Association is probably the largest and most respected medical body anywhere. And recently at one of their national forums, they tabled a motion, and it was passed, that light pollution must be declared a health hazard. And they strongly recommended that governments take this into account and start trying to control the massive proliferation of blue white lighting, because it's the short wavelength blue lighting that causes a lot of problems with living things, including human beings. And they strongly recommended that light pollution be placed high on the agenda of issues that governments must be confronting at the time. The disappearing universe, of course, is something that can easily be reversed. Most light pollution is caused simply by light shining above the horizontal, although with brighter lights, such as we have nowadays, there's an awful lot of reflection off the ground as well. So it's certainly not true, the brighter the better. I'm sure a lot of local authorities choose bright lights because they think the more light the better. But of course, bouncing off the ground into the sky and all around through people's windows, not a good idea. Is there any solution to all this? Well, there must be, or I wouldn't be talking to you. It's not rocket science to put light where it's needed. Why am I showing you a picture of Pluto? These are the icy mountains of Pluto. Ice as hard as steel because it's billions of miles from the sun. NASA scientists designed the New Horizons probe. And several years ago now, it reached the planet, now a dwarf planet, as you might know, Pluto. It discovered that it has a sort of faint nitrogen atmosphere, this haze that you can see here. It's not totally spherical, but the point I'm making is that that spacecraft arrived at exactly the right place, exactly the right time, billions of miles, kilometers away from this planet. That's true engineering. That's a miracle of human ingenuity. Now, getting light right is nothing like as complex as getting a spacecraft to somewhere a long way away. It's absolutely not. This is rocket science. This is not. This is Bibendum. Who's Bibendum? He's the Michelin man. That's his name. And he's noticed something about the tire depot. And you can see he's saying, look at this light here. Have you seen it? Why does it shine across the road into the houses? Why doesn't it shine down on the workplace, on the forecourt down here? Why does it dazzle drivers on this road here in front of me? Nobody knows. I think the Michelin man's got it right. He realizes that nearly all modern lights of this kind are designed to be mounted horizontally. The optics inside this light are asymmetrical, which means that they shine preferentially one way, forwards. So if you point them upwards like that, a lot of the light will go up into the sky. Most of it will go sideways into the eyes of drivers and neighbors. Very little of it will actually go straight down onto the forecourt. So the light's been totally misapplied. It's completely misdirected. Now here's a nice scene. It's two lights. You see, they're directed down onto the area to be lit. The only point these lights have is to show people what they're doing, where they're going in this little area in front of a house, to allow somebody to park a car, get out of it, go indoors. They're not dazzling the onlooker. This is not rocket science. If you have problems with neighbors shining bright lights into your windows, you might give them this as an example. There's plenty of photos of good lighting on the internet. Look at the website of the Commission for Dark Skies and just search Commission for Dark Skies. And you'll see lots of examples of lights, both bad and good. There are many other organizations too who are very interested in lighting at night. The CPRE, the Countryside Charity, you can look at their website. They've got a fabulous night light section. You can look at the International Dark Sky Association's website, darksky.org, and you can find all sorts of useful information about get it right. One of the problems in getting it right is if you walk into, no names mentioned, if you walk into your local retailer of electrical goods, there are very few lights that are actually very well designed. Let's start over on the right here. This is on my local hospital. It's rather difficult to point it downwards onto the pavement, which is where the light belongs, because this bracket here is rather short. It may be that you can't point it down much more than that, in which case the light is shining 50% into the sky, and there is a road directly towards this light here, so it's dazzling drivers. Not a good idea in the vicinity of a hospital where people might not move too fast in some cases across the road. And it's just wasting a lot of energy too. It's very typical of modern lights. You can see they have this little yellow rectangle in the middle, which is the light source. Here's a wall-mounted light outside a house. You can see that quite a lot of it is going upwards. And the problem being that a lot of lights on retailers' shelves just cannot be pointed correctly, and they shouldn't be there. In the 1990s, a lot of road lighting began to be very well directed. Here's a good example here. The light source is up inside the casing. The light can't go anywhere but downwards, giving this effect here. Although these are actually tennis court lights, I believe. And as you can see, they're very well directed. Here's another kind of light that does the job on a rural footpath, and it's on a sensor so that it only comes on when somebody needs it in the area as they approach, and this can only go downwards, as you can see. And if that light source isn't too bright, everybody can see what they're doing. So shield them, angle them correctly. Building lights, for example, here, you can get plenty of building lights that shine only downwards, because what do you need to see? You need to see what's down there. And if there is anybody lurking around here at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's unlikely there'll be any witnesses at that time, but if there are any, they'll see the person. But if the lights shine outwards and dazzle potential onlookers, they probably won't even look in that direction. And you can go about your nefarious business, Mr. Burglar, undisturbed. So there's a little mantra, there's a little catchphrase, if you like, among lighting professionals and also lighting campaigners. And it's use lights only when necessary, where necessary, in the right place, the right time, the right light. And the most important thing, because having put up a light, a lot of people will be rather loath to take it away again. Get it right before it's installed. Get a light that has the right brightness for the job, the right lighting for the lighting task. This one, as you can see, is a little bit glary. Shines all over the place. Don't shine lights into people's property. This one is going straight through the bedroom window here. And if they're too bright, there's plenty of reflection off the surface beneath, even if it's vegetation, and it can go straight up into the sky. Here are two photos from that splendid CPRE nightlight campaign taken by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the USA. And the first one shows light pollution over the UK, or rather from the UK, if you like. in 1993. Red, of course, is very saturated. These light blue colors show the encroachment of urban lighting into countryside areas. Dark blue is pretty good. You'll see plenty of stars from the dark blue and blackish areas. Now we move to 2000, and if you notice the transition there, I'm going to toggle between the two. You'll see the growth of the problem in just those few years. 1993, 2000. Those are gas and oil flares in the North Sea, by the way, from platforms. Do you think this has got any worse in the intervening 21 years? And the answer is yes. You might think that the problem hadn't got worse because it seems that all the lights on main roads in the last decade, 2 decades even, have been downward directed. The Highways Agency, or Highways England, as it's called in this part of the world, has a policy, they've had it since 1995, of fitting only downward shining lights. Can't be too modest about this. The Commission for Dark Skies did talk to them and the CPRE and others for a very long time before this happened. And we like to think we had something to do with it. But if you go along any A or M road now, it's a pretty good chance that all the lights will be shining downwards. So why is the light pollution increasing? It's because they're too bright. The lights are too bright for the job. And domestic and commercial lights, it's exactly the same story. Decades ago, domestic and commercial house lighting was pretty low key. It illuminated the pathway, the driveway, the garden, if you like, fine. But nowadays, of course, the only thing you can get from many retailers is a very, very bright, glary exterior light. In many cases, it won't point downwards. It just has to point all over the place. And people install it. You don't need a professional installer really to bolt a light to your wall. And people install these things at any old angle because they don't really understand the problem. A couple of examples here in rural areas. Here's a farm in northeast Scotland. The purpose of these lights, well, we just have to think what they're for. The idea, of course, is to illuminate the farm property, but it's doing an awful lot more than that. Here's a car park in rural Kent. At least we think it's a car park, but nobody can see anything here. It's a happy hunting ground for people who want to steal things from cars. So these are anti-lights, if you like, lights that conceal rather than reveal, which is a very bad joke. Sports lighting plays its part. Here's a sports venue in rural Essex. You can see it's a cloudy night. Here's a sports venue in Wiltshire. It's actually a golf driving range. Stonehenge is about 3 miles in that direction. And this area is in fact a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So here you've got arguably the most astronomically significant monument in Western Europe, and the council has permitted the lighting to go ahead. This is not malicious, it's simply lack of knowledge, lack of understanding of the nature of light and its effects. And this is simply a car park light in the New Forest National Park. And although it can be pointed downwards, if you look at the bracket here, it's not very far because also there's this sensor mechanism attached to the bottom of the light. So if you take the light back too far, it's going to bang against the wall and you won't be able to point it vertically downwards. So if you want to dazzle drivers in a car park, which is a bad idea, especially on a rainy night, if there are people moving about on foot as well, that's the way to do it. Let's talk about lighting and the law. This pile of fly tipping was deposited not long ago in a woodland path not far from where I live here in Dorset. If you do this and you're caught, you can be fined and made to clear it up. If you continue to do this, you can be put in prison. Not long ago, a person who deposited concrete waste in a field in Essex was fined £5,000. And after a repeat offence, he was put in prison for a couple of years. So this is something that the government treats rather seriously. It's a criminal offence. If you destroy crops, if you foul waterways, you can be fined. If you happen to be a ship's captain and you dump oil into the sea, especially if it fouls beaches, you can lose your ship and go to prison for years. But of course, the one part of our environment that has no protection in law is the sky, the night sky in particular, which also helps to explain the massive proliferation of Earth satellites that are now being launched, but that's another story. So, big fine for that? No fine at all for this. This is sports lighting too. All-weather pitch. I think there probably are some stars up there somewhere, but nobody can see them, of course. There is one very poorly enforced law in this country about light pollution, and it's only about light pollution into houses. This is the Clean Neighbourhoods and Environment Act 2005, Section 102A. You can look it up. Clean Neighbourhoods and Environment Act. We as a campaign have lots of messages, lots of appeals, some of them quite desperate from people who are troubled by neighbours' lights. We say there's a law that can protect you from this, but of course some councils would only enforce it if it damages your health. I know of councils who demand a doctor's letter if you're troubled by glary lights from neighbouring premises. And the really sad thing about this particular law is that transport-based premises, railway stations, bus stations, docks, lorry parks, they're exempt. Nobody can tell us why they're exempt. DEFRA, the Department of the Environment, cannot tell us why they're exempt. Nobody seems to know, or if they do, they're not telling. It's very interesting. So if you're dazzled by light from a railway yard, then tough luck. There's nothing you can do about it. Another interesting fact about stray light is that the light pollution of the night sky in rural areas is caused by urban lights in the main. There are farms and villages, of course, that might emit light, but a lot of light comes from nearby towns. And over the years, it's changed from orange, the old sodium lights that we had way back in the 70s and 80s, into sort of whitish grey sky glow, which is LEDs. Now, this is a diagram from the splendid Institution of Lighting Professionals. They have an awful lot of stuff on their website too. It's the ILP, that's all one word, theilp.org. And this is one of the diagrams that is very useful indeed if you want to talk about light and where it goes. Here's the light that should be there, the task light as it's called. Here's the light that shouldn't really be going over there through people's windows, and definitely not upwards into the sky. And it's that 10 degrees of light that causes a lot of light pollution, because of course, what is light pollution of the sky? It's not, if you think about it, it's not really light going upwards. It's like coming downwards towards you, scattered by particles and aerosols and all sorts of tiny, tiny things up there in the atmosphere. So light goes up from the ground and it comes back down again into your eyes. And it's nearly all caused by this low level 0 to 10 degrees light escaping from distant light sources. In that lower part of the atmosphere, there's an awful lot more particles and aerosols than there are higher up. So pointing light directly up into the sky causes less light pollution counterintuitively than light traveling at shallow angles. There's plenty of scientific research on this. A lot of it done by Dr. Chris Baddeley, who's a member of our committee and physicist. There's a lot more to be said about the night sky, really, apart from the fact that we ought to protect it from stray light. It's a huge inspiration. It's a wonderful thing to see. I work and give talks, not as much in these days of COVID, of course, but I've spoken to thousands, possibly, of people about the night sky and its value and its beauty. And people say, yes, I went to New Zealand or Africa or the middle of nowhere for my holidays. And I was absolutely stunned to see all the stars in the sky. I never knew there was such a thing, because 9 people out of every 10 in developed countries aren't able to see this because of light pollution. And I tell them that, there's the Milky Way, the galaxy that we live in, stretching across the sky like a silvery bridge. Did you see that? Yes, I noticed that. I wondered what it was. It looked like a big cloud in the sky. And did you notice the dark patches? Yeah, what are they? I just thought they were holes in the stuff. No, they're not holes, they're dust. This is dust that's been made by generations of stars that have lived and died. Stars live for a very long time. The sun is a pretty average, medium-sized sort of star. Its lifetime is about sort of 10 billion years, and it's halfway through it. And the sun is producing to make all that light and energy that keeps us all alive and drives all our weather and grows our food. It's simply turning hydrogen into helium. It's a simple thing, isn't it? But we owe our very existence to this fact. And big stars make more elements: carbon, helium, oxygen, nitrogen, iron. All the elements are made by stars. And the really heavy elements are made by supernovae, by colliding pulsars and things like this. Where do you think all that gold and silver comes from, and platinum? Why is it so expensive? Because there's not much of it, because there aren't many supernovae making it. But the really important thing up there is that black stuff, because this is the dust of dead stars. That's what we're made of. Every single thing on this planet is made from this dust. Whether it's alive or inanimate, it's made from this dust. So the stars, to coin a phrase, are our chemical parents. They're so important in our lives. The star we call the sun is absolutely important in our lives, and things like this, these tiny distant dots, which are in fact all suns, giant stars, they made all the elements in our bodies, apart from the hydrogen, which was made in the Big Bang, and that too is another story. And that light travels for hundreds and thousands and millions of years to our eyes. And isn't it sad that we lose it? We lose the light of our chemical parents in the last millisecond of its journey, stolen from us by people who can't aim lights properly. The Commission for Dark Skies has been around since 1989, and to try to counter this tide of light pollution, we talked to central government, and something very exciting is happening in the corridors of power at the moment in Westminster. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. We talked to regional government, local government, and a lot of them are hearing the word. They're dishing out leaflets on light pollution. They're telling people how to mount lights properly. They're talking to retailers about getting proper information in the packaging of lighting so that it's not put up randomly. We talk to industry. One of our recent Good Lighting Awards, endorsed by the Astronomer Royal, Lord Rees, was given to British Sugar, a very large company, a national company, who in their sugar beet processing plant in Norfolk made sure that all the lighting was changed so that it shone only into the plant, the factory, and not all over the fields outside. A group of amateur astronomers mentioned this to them, and wow, they said, we didn't realize we were getting it wrong. And they spent a lot of money and they earned our Good Lighting Award. Well done, British Sugar. And plenty of other companies and industries have followed this good advice. There's all sorts of local organizations, sports clubs, for example, a very important example, who have changed lighting. My local football club has just moved its ground and they've got really good stuff now pointing downwards on the pitch instead of sideways into houses. We talk to lighting professionals, and there's a huge groundswell of opinion now amongst the lighting industry that they really ought to tidy up this problem with LEDs and overbright lighting. And we try to talk to people sometimes on an individual basis about installing the right kind of lighting. Because star quality lighting, as we like to call it, the good stuff, protects both the celestial environment above and our terrestrial environment and all its inhabitants, whether or not they've got 2 legs, 4 legs, 6 legs, whatever. Even 8 legs, all those spiders, they don't like it much either. Is all this moaning working? Well, we think so. There's a lot about light pollution. Did you see the BBC News and Radio 4 a couple of days ago? They had an awful lot about light pollution in various parts of the country. There was Chris Packham there talking about the effects of light pollution on bats and other animals. We could go from this. This is an all-sky camera, as you can see. Some of us might remember Comet Hale-Bopp, see it there? Yeah. We could go from this to this with the right attitude in government, with the right kind of legislation. And this has already happened in some other places in the world. So the answer to that question is yes, slowly but surely. And we hope that if enough of us make a noise about it, and we set a good example with our own lighting, it might accelerate. If you're wondering what these are, that's a tin mine in Cornwall. That's there just for the effect, really. You can see the plough sitting there behind it. And this is the Shetlands, and this is what the oil industry has done to the night sky of the Shetlands. The LED revolution. We said that the tide might be turning, but there's a great tide in lighting itself, which is the LED, the light emitting diode. This is going to be the only game in town, as far as lighting is concerned, within the next 10 or 20 years. You won't see anything else soon. LEDs are here, and they are here with a vengeance. The brightness, the intensity of an LED road light, for example, is determined by the number of the elements here, these little LEDs mounted on the matrix here. And as you can see, they're nearly always nowadays on roads pointing downwards. But unfortunately, they are very often far too bright for the task, and they're very often blue rich. And this is the problem. Blue rich is bad for living things, including me and you. You might be familiar with this painting. It's called The Scream. It's by this guy, Edvard Munch. Why am I showing you this? This is what Munch said about his own painting in the late 19th century. I was walking along the road. The sun went down. I felt a gust of melancholy. Suddenly, the sky turned a bloody red. I stopped, leaned against the railing, tired to death, as the flaming skies hung like blood over the blue-black fjord. I felt a vast, infinite scream through nature. So, as many people have become aware recently, it's not the person who's screaming. That is Munch. It's a self-portrait. And he's putting his hands over his ears because he doesn't want to hear the scream of nature. And later, Munch, in an interview, talked about this picture and said it was an expression of the irreversible impact of civilization on nature. So it's a useful thing, this picture. It's readily available. And it's a useful thing to show people about what's happening to the natural world. And nearly everybody's aware that there's a big problem with human intervention and despoiling of the natural world. Because there are so many things that we'd regain if lighting were correctly controlled, well-directed, not too bright for the task, if lighting were really regulated. Like this, for example. This is the Northern Lights. It's not taken from the Arctic. It's not taken from northern Norway or Finland or somewhere. This is taken from Portsmouth on the south coast of England by David Briggs. He's not in the centre of town, of course. He's on that ridge over the north of Portsmouth, looking into the countryside of Hampshire. And here are the Northern Lights. And quite often they come down over the UK. You can look at various websites like spaceweather.com and see the position of the auroral oval, as it's called, sitting over the North Pole. And occasionally it drops down towards Britain, and we can see the Northern Lights even in the south. And looking at the bigger picture, of course, the way that light pollution will be solved is that governments must be steered towards prioritizing the climate crisis, and light pollution is a large factor. Let's talk about the disappearance of all those invertebrates in the countryside. Yes, it's all about the destruction of habitat. Yes, it's all about pesticides. But as the lighting professional whose talk I listened to the other day said, the third big factor in this is stray light, especially blue-rich stray light. It is a large factor in the disappearance of the insects upon which all our lives depend. And that good news about Parliament is that there's now a new all-party parliamentary group, APPG, for dark skies. More than 30 MPs now are involved in this. The all-party parliamentary group is chaired by, co-chaired by the Astronomer Royal, Lord Rees, and by Andrew Griffiths, the MP for Arundel and the South Downs, which of course is one of these international dark sky reserves. Have a look at their website, APPG Dark Skies Co UK, and they do talk a lot of sense. They've spoken to hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals and organizations all around the country, all over the world, including the International Dark Sky Association in America, about sorting out the problem. They've got on their website the 10 policies that they've recommended to the British government, and they are urging them to pursue the problem of light pollution, because it's not the astronomers' problem that most people think it is, it seems. I think it involves an awful lot more than that. And they, like us and like the CPRE and the IDA and all sorts of other organizations, are telling them that the fragmentation of darkness must be reversed. Creatures are being driven ever further into dark areas, and many of them are reverting to urban living. Foxes are a very good example, which is not really very natural. The role of the blue-rich light and the intense light, which LEDs, unfortunately, are giving us these days has to be addressed. The precautionary principle, that's very simple. If it might be harmful, don't do it. So an important scientific principle. If this is going to produce a negative result, perhaps we ought not to do it. And this must be applied to LEDs. If there's a chance, if there's a suspicion that they might be harmful and they might be doing wrong, then don't install them. Try to work out what the best kind of LED is. And if you fit something like 2000, 3000 Kelvin, the color temperature, what they call warm white lighting, it's going to do a lot more good to the world than all this 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 even Kelvin harsh, cool white lighting. So one day we might get things like this back for people who live outside towns. And in towns, people might be able to at least to see the major constellations and appreciate that there's a bit more to the night sky than just the moon and a couple of bright planets. We need to ensure that regulation rather than guidelines governs lighting practices. We need to ensure that light doesn't go where it's not supposed to be, especially upwards. We need to put curfews on lighting so that they don't shine when nobody's around and they're not needed. We need to ensure that lighting doesn't have more than 3000 Kelvin color temperature, i.e. warm white rather than cool white, harsh lighting. We need to ensure that retailers don't have their shelves crammed with exterior lights which simply are spoiling everything around them, driving away wildlife, dazzling people, ruining the night sky, wasting the energy, money of the people who buy them. We need to ensure that sky beams and the commercial use of the night sky don't happen. They're already illegal in more than one country. And there should be extra measures, of course, for national parks, AONBs, intrinsically dark places, with all the creatures that depend on that darkness for their livelihoods. In December 2018, France passed a national overarching light pollution law. In France, it's illegal to point a light above the horizontal. Lights have to shine where they're needed, not elsewhere. Many lights have to be turned off, shop lights, for example, at 11 p.m. You might have heard of groups all over France who are now turning off the shop lights themselves because in France they have security switches on the outside for fire brigades. If there's a fire inside, they turn off all the electricity. In Mexico, since quite recently, February, they've had a national light pollution law. And in various other countries and regions, you can check this all out on the internet, on our websites. Places like Lombardy in Italy, the Czech Republic, Liechtenstein, a very small country, they've got statutes to protect the night sky. It can be done. It is being done. It has been done. One day, the British government might cotton onto this and realize that it really should be done. Thanks very much for listening to me. We're the Commission for Dark Skies. There's our website. If you can't be bothered to write it down or copy it, then just search Commission for Dark Skies and you'll find us. And I'll leave you with David's beautiful picture of the Northern Lights from the south coast of England. And if you can't see that from where you live, well, perhaps you should start talking to people a little bit about lighting and how to do it. Thank you very much.